Theology. Unplugged.
Hey guys, Michael Patton here with Through Theology in a Year of Theology Unplugged. We're going through number 74, and we're continuing our session on bibliology and hermeneutics, textual criticism. This can be textual criticism number 4. It shouldn't take us long to get through it, maybe about 15 minutes or so, because we don't have that much to cover. Although although you can look at the bottom of the screen and see how long it is whenever you start this. I was going to say don't hold me to that, but you're probably already not holding me to it, because you can probably look down at the bottom of the screen and see we went a lot longer. But we are going to finish it today. Textual transmission number 4, and we are going to talk about the 3 primary factors that add value to extant, existing manuscripts. Obviously, it's going to be existing manuscripts, not non-existing manuscripts. Number 1, how close do they come to the original? Obviously, you want to get closer to the original. You want your manuscripts to represent, you want to close the gap between the manuscript you have in your hand and when it was originally written. And you want to find out, you want to have a lot of copies. You don't want to have just one copy. Even though you may have closed the gap, you want to have many copies of those, because number 1, it shows value. It shows that people value this particular manuscript, this particular scribe, and it was copied many times. People would usually copy the better scribes more often. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you would get a bad scribe copy to be copied many, many times. Although the people don't know it's a bad scribe copy, they think it's a good one, or they think it's a better one. But anyway, so you got how many copies do we have? And then here's an interesting one that you may have not seen before. How wide is the geographical distribution? And this will make sense as we run through this. Now, here's one thing I think this is a great chart, and I think you need to keep this in mind whenever you are talking to people about the number of manuscripts we have. And we'll have a chart at the end that has how many manuscripts compared to all these other historical figures and their writings. But sometimes we overstate it. Sometimes we can say it in ways we don't really understand what we're talking about. When we talk about the manuscripts that we have, we're talking about manuscripts that come before the invention of the printing press. And so this could have been in the 13th or the 14th century. We're talking a 14th century manuscript that we find. And does that have a lot of value? Yeah, it does in some ways, but in other ways it doesn't, because we have we have copies from the Gutenberg press right after that. We'd rather get it earlier, much, much earlier. The 1400 years after it was written is not as good as 100 years or 200 years after it was written. So sometimes we look at these manuscripts and we say, we've got a total of, say, 6,000 manuscripts. Yes, we do. That is true. But don't overplay your hand here. Don't underplay it as well. You can overplay it and then make it to where you can't play the right hand that you have. You can't show how good your hand is because you've already overplayed it. Look at this chart. This chart represents from the 1st century all the way down until the 18th century, the types of manuscripts, the manuscripts that we are talking about. Now notice here, most of our manuscripts, the highest number come from the 13th century. Now, is that valuable? Yes, but you can overplay your hand by acting as if these all 6,000 of them come from the first couple of centuries of the church. They do not. As a matter of fact, notice here, if you go all the way back to the 1st century, we don't have any. 2nd century, we have 4. 3rd century, we have, 50? 50 total. You've got lectionary, and then you've got the papyrus. And then after that, you begin to have the majuscule, which is the capital hand, kind of new handwriting that we are using. And then the minuscule comes later on. So the papyrus, sometimes you get a mixed bag between the minuscule and the majuscule, the capital letters and the lowercase. It's kind of interesting, and these depends on the scribe that you're using, and it also shows the changing of scribes. Sometimes a new scribe will be brought in the middle of a copy session, and they'll change from capital letters to lowercase letters, and just different characteristics. So it's very interesting looking at these manuscripts. But notice here, this is the most important thing I want you to see, is that yes, we have a lot of early copies. Yes, I mean, in the 3rd century, we have 50 copies. In the 2nd century, we have 4. However, remember, these are normally fragments. We don't get the entire books, like book type, codex type. The codex wasn't even invented, which is the book that we have today. The codex is the front and back page, plus it is placed one book after another. We don't get that until the 4th century, maybe the 3rd century, but really in the 4th century, that's when we have them. That's when we have the great codexes of Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. And those are included here, so it's really great to have the 4th century manuscripts. So remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to marry, if you can look at this, we're trying to marry if we can marry one of those 30s, and that's a full book, right? We take one of those 30s and we say, this is Codex Vaticanus. It has the entire Bible, because that's what that would be. We actually do have that. This is Codex Vaticanus. We have the entire Bible here in 350, and it comes from the same text type as one of these number 4s that we have. And that is very true. That is what we end up finding. We're able to marry one of the 30s, the entire Bibles, from the 4th century to the earlier manuscripts, based upon understanding the text types. Remember, marrying we found a King James here in the 4th century. Do we have a King James here in the 2nd century? That's the idea. We found a New American Standard here in the 4th century. Do we have one in the 1st century? Most all 1st centuries come from one text type. It is called the Alexandrian text type. Now I want to look specifically at these text types by looking at them through geographical distribution. Okay, percentage distribution of New Testament manuscripts by century. Notice here, this kind of gives you an idea as well what percentage of the manuscript distribution you have by each century. I think this is interesting. It's not as good as the last one, but it is a good chart. Okay, how many copies do we have? And then we've talked about that. Then what's the geographical distribution? Now, there are 4 different places that we find manuscripts. Now, these places don't always mirror exactly the text type, but generally speaking, they do as well. So whenever we're looking at the Caesarean text type, the Byzantine text type, the Western text type, and the Alexandrian text type. The Alexandrian text type is usually the earliest found ones, and the Alexandrian, that's what we have whenever we look at, say, P52. That is an Alexandrian text type. It dates back very early. The earlier manuscripts are normally Alexandrian. Byzantine are usually the Middle Ages. Caesarean and Western. The reason why I have this is not to tell you about text types again, but to tell you we want to find a text in as wide a distribution as possible. Because if we only find it in one place, then while it could be the original, it could represent the original, more than likely the original is going to find its way around the world. More than likely the original will find its way into all these different geographies. It will push its way through, and that's what we would like to see. So if we find something very early and then it also has a wide distribution representation, then we say this is more than likely original. Now, whenever we're doing whenever we're making individual choices on individual words, not just saying which manuscript is better, but whenever we are doing textual criticism, say in our study, while we're studying the Bible by ourselves, and we say, I wonder if there are any variations of this particular word here. And you begin to look and you see, yes, there are. This is what you'll do. You'll start to ask all of these questions. Where did it come from? How many do we have? How early is it? And all of this will kind of start to play a part in you putting together and making a decision on why it is you think this particular word, not that particular word, is better whenever studying the Bible. Now, normally, the important thing is to know this doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in any significant areas. It's not as if we are trying to figure out whether or not Christ is God or whether or not he rose from the dead. It's just usually smaller words like echomen versus echomen in the Romans chapter 5 verse 1. Let us have peace with God, or we have peace with God. The difference in an omicron. Very small difference in the word, but different texts will have different things. So we look and we say, what does it have do we have any Alexandrians that date back early of this particular word? Do we have any reason for Paul, whenever we understand Paul, from how we understand Paul, to put it this way and not that way? Well, what stage in his argument is he at, and what fits best in the context? There's all kinds of things that come into play, and this is just another part of our study, trying to understand the manuscript distribution of the particular variant that we have in play. So, important New Testament manuscripts. As I've shown you many times, we've got P52, which is John Ryland's papyri, and that is, or just called the Ryland papyrus. It is 110 to 125. Really, I ought to update that and say more 150 to 200. Now, it could go all the way back to 110 to 125, but I think I may be overplaying my hand. There's been a recent book that has come out that has encouraged people not to go too early with that, go more mid to late second century. So I think I'll go along with that because these people know better than I do. Fragment of John, earliest known witness to the New Testament. Again, that is a Alexandrian text type, the P52, but so is P46 and so is P45. So what do you have? Now notice here in P45, like I told you, sometimes you get a mixed bag. You got the Chester Beatty papyri, and that is the Gospels and Acts. It has Mark, which is a Caesarean text type, but then you got Matthew, Luke, and John, and it's an intermediate between an Alexandrian and a Western text type. What does that mean? That means there's kind of a mixture there. Sometimes it looks like an Alexandrian text, and sometimes it looks like a Western text. These are the ways that we have to classify these texts. There may be a better way coming out. We may, start running this through AI, and AI is able to help us with this, but I think it's a good way. I think we're making good decisions based upon the way we're doing it right now, and I think it needs a human touch to it. But P46 is Chester Beatty. That is the all the Paul's epistles, the complete copies, are incredibly important. P46 is a wonderful text. It's one of our earliest texts too. So it's a great text, having all 10 of Paul's epistles, and it is closest to the Alexandrian. So that is the way this kind of works. I hope that has helped you with it. Oh, one more thing. You've got Sinaiticus, Alexandrius, Vaticanus, and notice here, these are our most important 3rd, 4th century manuscripts that represent almost the entirety of the New Testament, sometimes all of the Bible. So you've got the Old Testament, LXX, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, plus the New Testament, and then you even got some books on top of that. We'll talk about that whenever we get into the canon of the Bible, because people would even put more than just their Bible. Whenever Codex came out, it's like, hey, why not add all the books that are valuable in this one codex, rather than just saying this is the Bible, the canon of Scripture, and nothing else goes in between these pages except for God's Word. Why not put the other texts that are valuable for Christians to read as well? And it seems to be that they did that, but we'll talk about that whenever we get into canon. It's very interesting. But the comparison between the Bible manuscripts and other reliable ancient manuscripts. This is the one you've probably seen before, and I wanted you guys to see the distribution throughout the years before we get back to this. But notice here, whenever you're talking about the New Testament, in Greek, we've got 5,000, 6,000. I mean, we're over 6,000 now. Whenever this was done, this was right, but we're over 6,000 now. And I just think of this. We got 6,000 handwritten manuscripts before the printing press. The closest that you can come to that is Homer's Iliad with 1,900. And, nobody ever questions these other books here. Nobody ever questions the Caesar Gallic Wars, which we have 251. Why? Because we have 251. That is a lot. And we can do the textual criticism on these books and be fairly certain that we're getting what it is that was originally written. Maybe not word for word or letter for letter, but at the same time, we're getting the gist of it. Whenever it comes to the New Testament, we got so much more to play with, because not only do you have the New Testament in Greek, but then you have all the other languages that was immediately translated into, and then you've got all the other commentaries and all the other lectionaries and all the other church fathers who wrote and gave their epistles to their own churches, quoting scripture after scripture after scripture. So we've got so many contexts in which it is used. There's just so much to use to put back together the Bible as close to the original as possible. And so therefore, when we're talking about the Bible compared to all of these others, the Bible is much, much more accurate. There's so much more scholarship devoted to it because there's so much more implied whenever it comes to the Bible. But anyway, there's nothing that even comes close. Homer's Iliad is the closest. Homer's Odyssey, 574. Josephus, 55. And we're fine with our Josephus. I mean, I've never done any textual criticism on Josephus to find out when the earliest one is that we have of him, but I imagine it comes from a Christian writer pretty early on. But anyway, I don't know. I've never done any of those. I just trust these. I really do. Unless there's some scholar within here that says we shouldn't trust this, then I trust them. Generally speaking, I do. But they don't have the implications that the New Testament has. The New Testament changes lives. It directs lives. It creates a teleology, a future for everybody, a purpose for everybody. And so therefore, I'm so glad that we have so much to deal with. I'm so glad that scholars are so careful, and trust me, they really are. You can look at the scholarship, you can look at the types of scholars that are out there, and they're not just trying to confirm their prejudice. They may be Christian. There's Christians and non-Christians working on reconstructing the Bible. Okay, so key is having established the accurate transmission of the New Testament. Notice here, I want you to see this movement I'm making. Because I don't make this lightly. We've already done the Old Testament textual criticism. We've already shown how we reconstruct the Old Testament, but not like I did with the New Testament. And there's not near as much time spent with the Old Testament as with the New Testament. Remember, we talked about the Codex Leningratus at the 11th century, and then we married that with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so we're fine with that. That's not much textual criticism being done. But let me show you this movement that we make that is very important, and you can make it as well because it's really a mental thing that you do. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying scholars need to back off on the Old Testament. There probably is some work that needs to be done. But at the same time, here's what we can say. Having established the accurate transmission of the New Testament, I think to a very large degree, there's still work that needs to be done there, but we can be so incredibly confident that the Bible we read today accurately represents the original. If that is true, then the Old Testament's accurate transmission and canonization can be reestablished by the testimony of the New. Now, what do I mean by that? The Old Testament's accurate transmission and canonization, what books belong in it, can be reestablished by the testimony of the New. So you do the independent stuff with the Old Testament, canon and textual transmission, textual criticism. But at the same time, we can say, listen, I'm going to do a little bit of cheating here. What is Jesus? In Jesus's day, he doesn't seem to question. He talks about the Old Testament. He quotes the Old Testament. He quotes it with authority and says, not one jot or tittle of the law will ever fade away or can ever fail. And I would say, if he says that, if that's true, and he does say that because we have it in the New Testament, and we've already established the accurate transmission of that. We'll talk about the historicity of it later, but we've already established the accurate transmission of that. If he has said that, then what does that say? Well, that says whatever Old Testament that Jesus had in the first century is established because Jesus affirmed it. Jesus, who we say is who the New Testament says he is, God incarnate, has just established whatever Old Testament he has in his day is correct. So as long as we can get it back to Jesus, which we already have, Dead Sea Scrolls went back before Jesus 200 years. So we are good with the Old Testament, in my mind at least. I mean, again, there is work that needs to be done. Please, Old Testament scholars, Old Testament guys, don't get mad at me for saying that. Hopefully you'll be excited that I said that because it's true. It's true that we can be confident. I need you guys to keep on working. I need you guys to keep on, reconstructing. I know there's big problems, and solve those problems. Not big doctrinal problems, not big problems in the way that you may be thinking of it. I'm saying it, big problems. Big problems from the standpoint of New Testament, Old Testament, textual criticism really means little problems once you hear them. Okay, now what do we want to talk about? Briefly, not long. I'm telling you, not long. Bible translations. I just want you to know now we come all the way full circle to that day you are at the bookstore. Do people even go to bookstores anymore? You are on Amazon and you're looking for a Bible and you say Bible. You type it in. And then all of a sudden all these Bibles come up, and it says all these different versions. Like let's see here. Do I have this up here? Hold on just a second. That's not it. Let's see here. No, not that one. Oh, yeah, I know where it's at. Find it. Bible. There it is. Okay. But I've got to bring it up over here. This here is my, this is called the Bible Works. You don't need to know that. That doesn't make any difference. But I just want you to show you whenever I'm looking at the Bible, this is the particular group of Bibles that I have open every time I'm studying a particular passage. So you have the New American Standard. That's the first English Bible. Why do I have that one? New American Standard, that's the New American Standard Update. That's why it has a U. The New American Standard is, it's not the most readable Bible. Maybe the newest update is better. I've never even seen the newest update, but it is the closest to what I like to read whenever I'm first reading the Bible, because it may be stilted, it may be hard to understand, but I'd like to see the ones that are more like that first. And then you go to the ESV. That's what that next English version is. Then you go to the NET, ESV, English Standard Version. This is the New English Translation. Then the, what is that? I don't even remember what this is. The Standard Bible, the Christian Standard Bible. That is right. That's right. That's one of the newer ones. The King James Bible. You got to have that one open. It's just a classic English version. New American Bible. That is the Catholic Bible. I like to have that open. I like to, kind of see what how the Catholics deal with particular passages. I mean, it's not big time difference ever, but I like to have it open anyway. BBE, just in case also it has the, I'm looking at something in the Apocrypha, the BBE Bible Basic English, the NIV, New English, or New International Version, New Jerusalem Bible, that's another Catholic Bible, New Living Translation, that is more of a paraphrase type. New American Standard, that's not the update, that's the one that came before it. New NIRV, New International Revised Version, Standard Version, I think. New King James Bible, New Revised Standard. I mean, it just goes on and on. This, I don't even have close to as many as I could have open. This is the ones that I study from, so that's the ones that I opened up and decided to use here. But my point is, you're going to find all these different Bible versions, and you say, which one do I get, Michael? And here's what I say. I say, listen, here's how they're done. Let me tell you first how they're done. Each one of these, save any of those. I didn't even think any of these would fall out of this, would not qualify for this. Save, like, say, The Message. Have you ever heard of The Message? It's Eugene Peterson's version of the Bible. He did it by himself. But most Bibles are done by publishers. So you'll have a publisher such as Thomas Nelson come together and say, we want our own Bible. And, maybe they have some good reason for it. They say it needs to be updated. English language has changed so much in the last 10 years that the 20 versions that we've had in the last 10 years are not enough. We need a new one. I don't mean to make fun of it. We just have so many English Bibles, while some people have zero. But of course, that's how business is done. That's how you keep businesses open. The Bible is by far the best-selling book in the history of the world, and will continue to be, and people know that. So, and of course, from America, from the Western world, that's where most of the money is spent. That is what people are buying. So most publishers want their own Bible. So you have Thomas Nelson come together and say, we want our own Bible. And so they get a committee together and they say, we're going to hire these 50 scholars, and these 50 scholars are going to translate the Bible together. And there'll be general editors, there'll be New Testament editors, there'll be Old Testament editors. Then there'll be people assigned to each book. And then all of these books come together and they kind of get smoothed over, so they're kind of just there's one standard style to it. We want there to be only one style. Most translations try to stick with a particular style. Like King James Version has a style throughout. It kind of flows. It's kind of poetic from beginning to end. Not because the writers were all poetic in and of themselves, but we wanted to make it more memorable so people would memorize it. So that King James, even back in 1611, there was a committee of people that came together and did it this way. Ever since we started doing Bible translations, this is the way that happens. So people will get together, they'll find the best manuscripts, do all the stuff we've talked about so far, textual criticism, making decisions on individual words by themselves, or using a standard Greek New Testament where people have already done that, and then they will make those decisions and make the translation from there. And they will, Thomas Nelson, these people may get together and they say, well, how do you want us to do it? What style do you want us to do it in? Do you want us to do it as a paraphrase? Do you want us to do it as a word for word? That is the big question with a Bible translation. The first thing you ask is it a paraphrase or is it more word for word? Do you want a Bible that's more readable and understandable in our English today, our way of phrasing things today, or do you want one that is more like it was originally, and that therefore harder to understand? Now, whenever I'm talking to people, you may say, Michael, which one should I get? I don't know. I'm trying to study the Bible for the first time, and I don't know which Bible I should have. I say, listen, if you're getting it in English, I would make sure you have one of each, one on each side of the spectrum, one that you read from that is kind of a devotional read through, and then one that you study from, which is more close to the original. And you say, okay, which one should I go with then? Well, let's take a look at them real quick. The different types of Bibles out there, I've got them listed here. Let's see if I can bring this up. 3 types of Bible translations. This is the way to look at it. Translation theories: formal equivalence or dynamic equivalence. The more dynamic equivalent you get, notice dynamic or formal equivalence, you got word for word or thought for thought. The further you get to one side, it's more thought for thought, and the further you get to the other side, it's more word for word. So think of it this way. Maybe you got the formal equivalence, which is word for word. Dynamic equivalence, let's say it's sentence for sentence, and then paraphrase is paragraph for paragraph. So if you could think about it that way, that's good. That would give you 3 categories of Bibles: word for word, hardest to read, but best for studying; paraphrase, easiest to read, but the furthest away from studying because it's more of a commentary the further you get over to a paraphrase. Once you're thought for thought, then it's just somebody telling you what they believe it means in this paragraph. Once you're word for word, they're just telling you what this word means, which is a lot easier than telling you what a paragraph means. So what does this look like? Well, look here. This obviously does not cover all of the English Bibles, but you've got up there, what's the furthest word for word you can get? Well, it's actually what's called an interlinear. And interlinear shows the Greek word underneath and then the English general translation above it. It doesn't show what the translation should be in that context, but it's just the general, how we generally translate this Greek word into English right above it. So sometimes it's very stilted the word order is in Greek is going to be way different sometimes than it is in English. Same thing with Hebrew. So interlinear, you may think, isn't that the best for studying? Not really. Not really, unless you can use an interlinear and you can use it well, but there's not a whole lot of context that I find it useful. The ASV, although I guess I haven't found it useful since I learned Greek and Hebrew myself in seminary, but I could see very, very much it being useful for people that are outside of seminary. But just be careful with it, because you can overplay your hand whenever you're using an interlinear and think you're kind of a little bit smarter than you are when you're looking at that, because it doesn't use the right words all the time to translate it. But anyway, you got the interlinear ASV, American Standard. That is then you've got the New American Standard Bible. Both the American Standard and the New American Standard are the closest you're going to get to word for word and still be able to understand it, because they'll still structure the sentence well. The King James is way up there, but it really has a great style to it. The King James is beautiful. It is something that, I mean, it's still lasting until today, even though it shouldn't be lasting anymore, but it keeps King James English alive. I mean, Shakespeare does a little bit as well, but the King James Bible really is what does it. And people love the King James. They love the feel, the flow of the King James. People, you can always tell people, you can always tell people whenever they're praying, if they're praying in King James English, where they're coming from. You know, it's really funny. They all of a sudden they're changed. Lord, we beseech thee to give us thy hand of blessing. I don't know. I shouldn't make fun of people, but it's funny. I love that. I love those type of prayers. I really do. But anyway, you can move through New King James Bible, the RSV, the ESV. Notice right in the middle, you might find something that you like best. Now, New Net Bible, this is an interesting one, because what it is it is right in the middle, and it does flow, and they try to keep it kind of not sentence for sentence. I mean, it's still more of a phrase for phrase. I don't know how to put it there, but it's right in the middle. And if there is different ways to translate it, if there is some debate about a word, if there is some debate about this particular verse, it'll have a footnote, and it'll come down and tell you all the other ways you can translate this, or it could be used. So it is a great Bible for a study Bible. It's a true study Bible. It doesn't tell you what the passage means. It tells you what it could mean. And so I always tell people, whenever you're getting a study Bible, everybody should have a Net Bible, New English Translation. Unfortunately, it is not there's not a whole lot of people with it that I find. Every time I tell people about it, it's usually the first time they've ever heard about it. And I wish it was very popular like the ESV. ESV is probably the most popular Bible right now, English Standard Version, and it is a good Bible. It's a good mixture between the New American Standard and the King James. It's got a smoothness to it, but it also has an elegance to it, but it also has a good mixture with the NIV, which has NIV is usually people look at that and say it is the Bible that you go to right in the middle, dead square in the middle. And that's why it was the most popular for so long. The ESV, I think, has took over the popularity of the NIV, although the NIV may have won it back. But the NIV was the first one that ever took the popularity away from the KJV, the King James Bible. But anyway, so the further you go down, New Living Translation, Good News Bible, Living Translation, what is that? The Phillips Translation, and then the Message. Notice when we get down to the Message, that one is all the way down at paraphrase. I should not have covered that up with that, but trust me, it goes all the way down to paraphrase there. So does the Living Bible is highly paraphrased too. Thought for thought. So the Message, whenever you read it, the way it will read a passage is just as if it is today. It'll be very, it'll even have our own idioms used today. So it will be very smooth. It's kind of a fun devotional Bible. It's a fun Bible to read through. If you've never read through it before and you've read through the Bible many, many times, I'm actually reading through the Message this year. It's the only Bible I'm using whenever I do my Bible study, I read through the Bible in a year, every year, and I've never used the Message as the Bible I use. And so this time I'm trying it, and I'm really enjoying it a whole lot, especially as I go through the Old Testament law where we're at right now. I'm always like, does it say that? I always find myself looking up and studying deeper because I'm like, I didn't know it said that, because this is the way that Eugene Peterson, the single individual who did the Message, sees it as being understood. So anyway, that is it for all. Believe it or not, we are done with the transmission of the Bible. Next, we're going to talk about the canonization. Don't forget to support if you can. That would be great. That is how I make a living. And one other thing, don't forget to check out Dan Wallace's textual criticism. This is at credocourses.com. This is a full course on this. Now, this is, let me see if I can get down to the sessions. Look, these are all the sessions you go through. Introduction, New Testament textual criticism, how to count variants, the number of variants, weighing the discrepancies. I mean, some famous variants 1, some famous variants 2, some famous variants 3, which is the best Bible. So this is basically what we have done just now on steroids, not only on steroids by length, but by Dan Wallace, because this is the best guy living today to teach this. And he is, anytime I talk about somebody being the Indiana Jones of textual criticism, that is Daniel Wallace. That is shot in the Credo House, at the Credo House here in Oklahoma City, our headquarters that we had, that we are going to get back soon. Right there, what you see is the Inklings room. That's why you have C.S. Lewis on one side and J.R. Tolkien on the other side. But anyway, enough about that. Don't forget also on the same Credo Courses site, that's where you can get these. You just go under, I don't know where you look, it's under accessories. Go to accessories, and then down at the bottom it will say manuscripts, and you can get any of these 3 manuscripts. These are great manuscripts. Love for you to have them in your library, just to be able to show people and have a conversation starter, especially after having gone through what we've gone through here these last 4 sessions. Or if you get Dan Wallace's course and go through it, that whole thing, you can get it digitally or you can get it through DVD. We actually still have a few DVDs, not very many left, but you can get the DVD. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Theology